Welcome back to another episode of the Sabre Roundtable. My name is Jonah, and as always, I will be talking to you about all things Buffalo Sabres hockey and even a little bit of the wider NHL. Just me today, no Christian, no JP. I don't love these types of episodes, but schedules just didn't align this Sunday, and well, truthfully, Christian and I could have recorded tomorrow night, but I sort of figured that our last episode that we did, episode 88, most of those talking points would sort of carry over into this one if we didn't end up doing the mailbag that we're eventually going to get into. I just sort of felt like only one Sabres game has taken place, the Sabres versus the Blackhawks, and none of the narratives coming out of that one are really all too different from what we discussed this past Thursday. So sort of figured, wanted to get an episode out to you by Sunday night, or I suppose Monday morning, depending on when you're listening to this. And I also thought it'd be a nice change of pace, even though it's only early into the season, if we did an October edition of a mailbag episode. So for those that don't know, I did go on Twitter and ask some people to send in some Sabres questions, some topics for us to discuss just surrounding the team. And a lot of those are going to probably touch on what we talked about in the last episode, but questions tend to be more direct or they come from a different angle, so they're always a very fun exercise, and we got a lot of those questions. Before we get into that, it is appropriate to touch on the one Sabres game that took place, that being the Saturday night's matchup against the Chicago Blackhawks, where the Sabres actually came out on top. They bounced back from the Columbus game, won this 4-2, albeit in pretty unimpressive fashion. For anybody that did tune into this one, the Sabres did kind of get outplayed for at least the latter half of the game. The first period I thought was pretty solid on their end, and they went into first intermission with a 2-0 lead. Goals from Tage and Beck Malenstein getting his first as a Sabre in probably the most Beck Malenstein fashion I've ever seen. It went off of, I think, the Chicago player's foot, and then his foot, and then into the net. So, kind of impressive, not going to lie. But the Sabres head into first intermission with the 2-0 lead. Chicago crawls back into the game off of 2 goals from Craig Smith, of all people. The first one just kind of cuts in and beats Luukkonen from, I guess, kind of far out. You'd probably want Luukkonen to make that save, but it's a nice shot. And then goal number 2, this one was a bit uglier, mostly because Mattias Samuelsson kind of messed up a breakout pass and then didn't pick up Craig Smith when the puck did get turned over the other way. Craig Smith got the rebound, bang, bang, and it's a 2-2 hockey game. But before that period ended, once again, the Sabres top line going to work. Tage Thompson finding J.J. Peterka backdoor across the ice off of a nice little totally legal pick by Bowen Byram, and that would put them back up ahead 3-2, and they would sit on that lead till the end of the game before Ryan McLeod buried his third of the season on an empty netter. So, contrary to what we've seen for a large part of this season, it is almost refreshing to see them pick up a win in a game they really didn't look good in. It's kind of tongue in cheek. It really doesn't feel good, but they probably did deserve this type of victory, and they now sit at 2-4-1, heading back home to face the Dallas Stars on Tuesday night. Some notes from this game: Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen had a really nice bounce back. As I alluded to, the Sabres did get outplayed in this one. Luukkonen went 35 of 37 for a .946 save percentage, and a 1.13 goals saved above expected, and that actually put him back into the positives in goals saved above expected on the season. Heading into this game, there was a lot of talk about getting Jack Quinn back into the lineup, but considering Yuri Kulik had scored his first NHL goal in the last game and looked pretty good doing so, inevitably he deserved to keep his spot in the lineup tonight. So people were theorizing ways to do that. Maybe Quinn ended up sitting another game. At practice, it sort of seemed like Benson was the extra in line rushes, but then Lindy Ruff gave word that morning that somebody was fighting an injury and Quinn would likely re-enter, and that turned out to be Jordan Greenway, who sustained a lower body injury against Columbus, and that would allow Quinn to get back into the lineup. He would go back next to Dylan Cousins and Yuri Kulik, and Zach Benson would go in the place of Jordan Greenway on the third line. I thought that it couldn't get any worse with this power play. And I mean, it really didn't. I can't really say it got any worse, but we're now at 0 for 21 on the season. We are 7 games into the season. The Sabres still have not scored a power play goal, and they still are at a negative goal differential. And it just keeps piling on because it circulated late last night that if you take a look at the entire Sabres organization, they're 0 for 44. If you take into account the Sabres, the Rochester Americans, and even the Jacksonville Icemen, they're 0 for 44. Crazy. Absolutely nuts. It's honestly pretty funny. It's impressive. I actually have to give them props that they are committed to winning games only with 5v5 goals. You know, hockey's meant to be played at 5v5, so I kind of get where they're coming from there. I respect it. It's almost like they're making a stand against power plays. Additionally, touching on 2 players that have received a lot of backlash, ourselves included, in the start of this season. We'll start with Matthias Samuelsson, who I alluded to kind of fell asleep at the wheel there on that second Chicago goal. Just kind of more of the same from what we've been seeing. I know the numbers on him and honestly on Dylan Cousins have not been as bad, but we've been watching the games. In the case of Samuelsson, I guess maybe there's more than meets the eye. Maybe we are being a bit too harsh on him, but it feels like multiple times this season, it's not unlucky bounces or unlucky plays that's kind of biting him. It's more so it feels like he's having a lot of brain farts or just mental lapses, and it's leading to goals. And it stinks because he's supposed to be, all of his lapses are defensive. It's not like the Sabres are in the offensive zone and he just kind of kills a play and that eventually leads to another goal. No, it's always feels like all of those lapses are in the defensive zone, which we saw another instance of against Chicago. And then we get to Dylan Cousins, who really more of the same. More of the same from him. We're going to touch on it later in the episode because inevitably we got questions or comments on him. But, for anybody that didn't see, you can go check out our Twitter at the Sabre Report, where we posted a clip that got a lot of eyes on it. It was one shift in particular from the Blackhawks game, and it's just start to finish Dylan Cousins' shift. It's his first shift of the third period, and he's just kind of coasting out there. He hit one guy down low in the Chicago zone. Other than that, it just kind of felt like he was coasting through it And a few people inevitably brought up the Pierre-Luc Dubois comparison, which I think it's a bit much. That was, I mean, come on, a bit of a different situation right there, but it is the same sort of lack of really effort or desperation, which in the case of Cousins, it's like there should be so much desperation there. I feel like he's got to be feeling some of the heat there. He's got to be feeling like he's not playing his best hockey. And he just looked completely gassed in that one shift. And you should never take one shift completely out of context to base the rest of your opinion on a player on, especially, if it's from one shift on the end of a West Coast trip, if it's one shift at the end of a road trip in the third period. But it feels like more of the same. It feels like most Dylan Cousins shifts were like that one. And I mean, I will bring up, he got an assist on that Ryan McLeod empty netter, and he made a really good play on it. He forced I forget who was rushing the puck for the Blackhawks, but he forced them to the wall and to try and make a chip play off the boards, and that didn't work, and that led to McLeod burying the empty netter. Yeah, more of that, please. More of that. I think a large part of it too is I feel like I'm going to save it for later in the episode because I think I sort of have a theory on it. I don't know if it's more of a off the cuff theory, but I think I might have an idea for what's going on. Lastly, that top line, it is as advertised. Thompson and Peterka in particular are really carrying the offensive load of this team right now. Peterka, his fourth goal in the last 3 games. Tage Thompson with a multi-point effort. The goal was a rip from the high slot, and the assist was arguably even nicer to spin around and find Peterka backdoor. It's nice to see those two continuing to trend upwards. And Alex Tuch's doing his thing. He's playing very solid. But to get back to Peterka, please sign that guy. He's not going through the Cousins thing. He's not going through the Jack Quinn thing. I think it's a pretty safe bet that what we are seeing is more to come in the coming years. Please get that man signed. So that wraps up this mini little road trip by the Sabres. 1-1-1. I mean, it's not the end of the world if you really think about it. It's just that Pittsburgh game obviously should have ended differently. They're up 3-1, then they're up 5-4 late, and then still lose it in overtime. And then the Chicago one being really frustrated because it wasn't a very inspired effort, but the numbers said they probably deserved a closer game at least, and that they didn't get the greatest performance out of Devin Levi. But they at least got the one win, 1-1-1. It's not the end of the world. I can't call this treading water. It's not quite that. But keyword is if you take the Prague games out of their schedule, they are 2-1. It's not great. You need better. And I know I'm not making any person feel better about this team moving forward, bringing up that stat, but they're 2-1 in North America. I'm trying my best to look at the brighter side of things, especially this early in the season. For at Thanksgiving, they're still a 500 team or even below 500, then yeah, narratives are going to start to shift. Or for me, I mean, they already shifted into the negatives long ago. So as we continue along, though, I'm going to try to see the light. One of those being Ryan McLeod. Once again, man, love the way that guy plays. I tweeted it out after the game ended. Perfect hockey player. He is the perfect hockey player. I just love watching him play. In any case, that wraps up the Sabres past game. And like I said, they will head home for a homestand that starts with the Dallas Stars on Tuesday. then moves to the Detroit Red Wings on Saturday, the Florida Panthers the following Monday, and then finally the New York Islanders the following Friday. So these games are pretty spread out, and they're all at home. They need a big homestand here. Definitely, the Dallas game will be the toughest, but Detroit is obviously very beatable. Florida might still be without Barkov, and same sort of story with the Islanders, another beatable team. Plus, I think Anthony Duclair just went down for them. Or at least I know he left the game the other night. I don't know what the timeline is there. So hopefully we have more positive stuff to talk about there. Christian and I will be talking to you on Thursday about the Dallas game, and then we'll talk next Sunday about the Detroit game. So very, very spread out here. Hopefully we can get back to more like NHL topics. I like talking wider NHL. It's just, in the case like last episode, it's hard because there's so much Sabre stuff to get through, even in the short period between episodes. Everything just sort of recontextualizes itself when a few more games are played. So if you like talking us wider hockey, apologies. I will do a This Team Stinks a bit later in the episode, although you can probably predict who it is. It's the only team that's still winless this year. But like I said, hopefully we can get back to that, at least this week, with games being so spread out. I do want to highlight the Rochester Americans really quickly. Not going much better for them. I think they're also 2-4. But the other night, Constantine is picking up his first goal in North America, and Anton Wahlberg scoring in that same game. So they both get their first tallies of the season. And I also want to talk about Victor Nuchev. He's leading the Amerks in points, 4 points in 4 games. Nothing insane, but just another guy that continues to really trend upward. And I don't know, may not be as far away from the NHL as we think. Hopefully he keeps it up. He's an incredibly fun player to watch. And like I said, Consta, you like to see him get on the board there. And hopefully we can see some continued good play from the many, many youngsters they got on that roster. Something that isn't going well on that team, rather predictably, is the goaltending. Now, they played the Marlies twice, and while one of the losses, Sandstrom probably was a big reason, they were in it for a large majority. He did have, I think he was the one with the really bad turnover behind the net. And then they played them the next day and vastly outshot the Marlies. And Hauser only had to make 20 saves, but they still ended up losing 3-2 after being up 2-0. So predictably, not getting James Reimer into that group is making things more challenging. Currently, they sit at 2-3. Last bit of prospect news here. Scott Ratzlaff signs his entry-level contract and obviously had a really strong preseason, especially his last game played against, I think that was the Blue Jackets game where he was perfect through half that game. And I talked a little bit about it in my prospect pyramid episode that I did prior to this season, how last season was a bit of a step back in the WHL, although the Seattle Thunderbirds, the roster overall took a step back. He needed to get back to his 22-23 ways, and so far he has. 3 games with Seattle, he's 3-0, a .933 save percentage, a 2.7 goals against average, and clearly that, along with the preseason and prospects challenges performances, was enough in Kevin Adams' mind to sign him to a contract. So good for him, a pretty fun goaltending prospect, and hopefully we get to see more of his improved play in the WHL moving forward, and maybe even see him with the Amerks should they make the playoffs this season. So, with all that out of the way, that really wraps up all the Sabres and Amerks and prospects news. I mean, to touch on some of the other prospects, I wasn't really going to touch on any of them in depth, but right before I hit record, Chris Baker, credit to him, put out this nice stats page on his Twitter and just kind of detailing just raw points per game for all of the Sabres prospects and even some of the goaltending numbers as well. And the top of the list, it's someone who I didn't even put on my pyramid. It's Vilami Marhala, who has been in the league of the past few seasons, and he's off to another good start. 10 points in 8 games. So good for him. Prove me wrong, man. I would be happy to add you to that group next year. And then Jake Richard, man, someone who I made the decision to put him in that potential NHL player tier. And I remember a lot of people sort of pushing back on that. He's off to a good start with Connecticut and the NCAA. 6 points in his first 5 games played, 4 of those points being goals. So awesome stuff there. And then Tobias Lehtonen. It's nice to check in on him through his first 7 games in the Elfskan. He's 4-2 with a .909 save percentage, 1 shutout. So very encouraging stuff from him so far. So like I said, go check out Chris Baker at Sabres Prospects on Twitter for the full sheet. He did a nice job with it, and it does streamline how to see how some of these prospects are doing. So with that all out of the way, why don't we just jump into the mailbag? So like I said, asked a lot of you guys to send in some of your questions or just stuff you wanted me to talk about, and a lot of them are pretty predictable just because of what's going on. I mean, we all know kind of what the issues are with this roster right now and what's holding them back. So why don't we just jump right into it? So we'll start with Dylan Cozens. There were about 5 or 6 people all immediately asking for me to talk about him. I'll just go in general. So we touched on it a lot last episode, Christian and I, about what potentially could be going on there. Or I guess we really didn't go, much into what is going wrong. It's just, it is going wrong. And I don't know, something sort of hit me on that empty net goal the other night. Maybe he's just really trying to play conservative. He's really trying to work on his defensive game, because from the moment he was drafted back in 2019, I can remember the Braden Point comparisons, and that had to be kind of his archetype, a potential 1C, somebody who he's not a Selke level player, but he's definitely very steady defensively and then just a force on offense. And I wonder that after the conclusion of the 22-23 season, where he was dynamite offensively, but did give back quite a number of goals defensively, if that was sort of the start of about a change in his game. I can remember early last season, I think they beat Tampa Bay super early. It was like a 3-2 game. And they went to post game, and Cousins was one of the guys being interviewed, and he talked a little bit about how he knows and the team knows that a lot of these wins this season, as in last year, they're going to have to win them in defensive sort of battles. And as we know, that would kind of be a trend as the season carried on. They looked nothing like their former season selves. They could not score a goal for the life of them. And a lot of guys, basically every player not named JJ Peterka and Casey Middlestat regressed. And I sort of wonder if Cousins was one of the key guys that the coaching staff, or maybe just the organization as a whole, wanted to hone in on and get more defense out of him. And I think we're just sort of seeing all these years later, post-draft, that, look, it's okay. It's just not who he is. He's not a great defensive player, even when back in the day, I say back in the day, like 3 years ago, when he was gaining a lot of notoriety, at least in the Sabres community, for how he performed against a lot of top team centers, from Connor McDavid to Austin Matthews to Sidney Crosby, how he was coming out ahead in those head-to-head matchups when they were matching lines. But It was more so he wasn't shutting them down. He was just outplaying them. He was generating more offense. And I think that that's okay. I mean, preferably, yeah, you want him to turn into Braden Point. But now we're just sort of seeing that I just don't think that's who he is. You know, they trust him in defensive situations, and he can be good. He's great on the penalty kill. He's great when there's an extra attacker out for the other team. But at 5v5 in the other 90% of his minutes, they're going to take place over the course of an 82-game season. Let him loose. You know, and maybe has full authority to be let loose, but you know, really encourage to him that just play free. I mean, it's kind of like we're almost going back in time to like when Granato took over, that you almost just need to tell him, just play your game. Don't try to become something you're not. For now, just do what you do best. I mean, we reposted a clip on Twitter that was the one goal from the 22-23 season where he just flies down the wing, you know, basically kickstarts a breakout on his own, flies down the wing, dishes it over to Jack Quinn, and it's just a beautiful 2-on-1 goal. And it's like, dude, I have not seen Dylan Cozens fly down the ice like that in so long. And I don't know if, like, that clip that we sent out, like, I don't know if his conditioning is just bad. I want to believe it's not. You know, it's sort of like what happened to the workhorse. This is who this guy was. He was the workhorse from Whitehorse. And I feel like the workhorse has almost sort of left his game. It doesn't feel like there's any desperation or want that was there a few seasons ago. And people are going to point to, oh, the Hathaway thing or or getting paid. Like it's always such a lazy excuse, I think. Just, oh, the guy got paid, he's playing worse on purpose or something, or he doesn't have the desire anymore. It's like, whatever. If I can't change your mind on that, I guess. So it's just how I'm feeling tonight and how I felt after seeing that empty net goal, that maybe he's just trying to work on his defensive game, and sort of goes back to what I said last episode. Like, what would I do? Lock him in a room and just show him footage of his 22-23 season just on loop, and just tell him to start doing that again. So that's sort of the first part of that question. Like, some people were asking, you know, what's wrong with Dylan Cozens? And that's sort of my answer to that. Another one that inevitably has been talked about, this one comes from Kasu on Instagram. Should Cozens be moved to the wing for the future and they end up trading Quinn away, or keep Quinn and trade Cozens? I still think it's way too early to talk about a scenario like that, like a Cozens trade or a Quinn trade. It's definitely too early for a Quinn trade. You need the entire season, and probably into next season too. And I think he's the one he's going to be fine. It's just, you know, he needs to get back on track, because obviously it has not been good. Cozens, on the other hand, we'll start with the wing conversation, which is another thing we went into on the last episode. Should he go back to wing? Or should he go to wing? I think no, and I also think you can't. In reference to you can't, it's been a big debate, or not a big debate, but just it's been a talking point because he's off to such a great start. Oh, the Sabres shouldn't have traded Middlestat. Well, either way, they did. They traded Middlestat, and Ryan McLeod's their third-line center. If you move Cozens to wing, inevitably you're moving Ryan McLeod up to second-line center, which I think I've been on record saying I think he can do, because I think he's that good. Your third-line center situation becomes a huge question mark, because Peyton Krebs is probably the first guy thrown in there. And then after that, maybe they try Yuri Kulik there for a little bit. I mean, it is one of the advantages of having him develop as a center in Rochester for the past 2 seasons. It's not like when Tage Thompson moved back to center, or even when Sam Reinhart moved back to center, where those guys were so far removed from their last. I mean, with Tage, it was basically his draft year, and it was like a good what four. He was 2016 draft. Yeah, 5 years since he had really played center. And even with Reinhardt, he had that brief period in like 2018. But aside from that, he really hadn't played center since his draft year in 2014. So that was another like 5 or 6 or 7 year period. Kulik's been playing center these past 2 seasons in North America. So there could be something there. I just think he's better served as a wing in the NHL, especially in his rookie season. So I think that's sort of a bad idea. And then after that, you get into like the Hellenius conversation, the Noah Oslin conversation. It just, you move Cousins to wing, it's just so, it leaves such a gaping hole in the lineup that you really can't immediately fix. Those sorts of additions aren't made in season. And even in the offseason, they're very difficult to make. A lot of teams don't have a quality second line center. So I don't think moving Cousins to the wing really works there. And I also think you shouldn't, because the things he does well are things that centers do, or conceivably things he does well. Like, he used to be a guy that, like, he was a transition beast. He was a entry monster. And obviously we haven't seen that recently. But when he was playing well, that's what he did well. One of the worst aspects of his game has always been his wall play or his board play. Like, Cousins is always a better player when he's moving. When he's stationary, that's where you can kind of pick out the weak spots. You just look at the game against Pittsburgh where he got pickpocketed because he didn't have a good sense of where, I think it was Nola Chari that stripped it, of where he was in relation to the boards, and his puck protection was pretty lackluster. That's kind of where he struggles, and that's kind of what you have to do as a winger. Be a good sort of insulator on the breakout or even in zone for your center. So I don't think it's a good idea to move him there for that reason either. Now, if they want to try it for a short period, maybe you put him with like Tage Thompson to get him going. I could maybe get on board with it, but you shouldn't move him there with the idea that's what we're going to do moving forward. I think that's a bad idea, and like I said, just the ripple effect in the lineup just becomes very apparent. Last Cousins thing. This one's from Sam_Harasimowicz. I hope I said that right. If someone calls asking about Dylan Cousins, would/should Kevin consider it? I say yes. I think in the NHL, you should absolutely take a phone call, no matter the player. Even if your name is Connor McDavid, you at least listen. But we can understand where this is going. We might not be too far away from hearing that a team calls on Cousins just for the hell of it. You know, conceivably, if you're another NHL franchise and you look at this guy, this is a 6'3", at his peak, potential 70-point, 30-goal player who can play second-line center. If you're seeing the upside, that's what he is. I would assume teams could maybe think that they're buying him at a low point. I think, yeah, you absolutely consider it. Absolutely. 100%. What does a Dylan Cousins trade potentially look like? I have no idea. It's probably, you're not going for picks and prospects. I think we know that. You're going for, I think, a big shake-up trade. Something just along the lines of the Middlestat trade, the Middlestat for Byram trade. I would assume a Cousins trade is like a 1-for-1, or at least it's him and another big guy, and maybe there's some minutia to hammer out with picks and more minor players. But I think Cousins, yeah, if there's a hypothetical scenario where he gets traded, or people are calling about him, you only consider it if it's for a player with just as much upside and importance to your lineup as Dylan Cousins provides. Maybe think the Rasmus Anderson idea has been thrown out there. I can get on board with that, but I still think maybe they should look elsewhere. Maybe look bigger or with more security. But that's kind of, yeah, if they want to get that big right-handed defenseman when using Cousins, that makes sense. It does. But even then, I think it's more of an off-season move. This scenario really, I don't want to say it's a waste of time because it's not. It's absolutely a productive conversation to have. But I think it's something that you save for, or it's something that just is pointless to talk about because it won't happen until the next summer. Okay, so the next one is from a variety of people. The one I'm looking at is from the Bo Byram fan account. How to fix the power play. So another question that we got a lot in our replies. The power play. 0 for 21 now. We know it's bad, and it looks bad. It's not like it's not one of those things where they deserve better. It's really, they probably deserve a goal or two. But it's not threatening. It's not, even early in the season, it felt like, you're in that early season stage where you're over-analyzing a lot of things. And from game to game, from game 3 to game 4, you can sit and look and be like, oh, well, game 3, they had this issue. But in game 4, it was fixed. Like the entries is one thing that we were talking about. Or game 4, they didn't really generate as much, but game 3 they did. So maybe if they can just get those two on the same page. We're 7 games in, over still a small sample size. It doesn't look good. It really doesn't. And how to fix it? That is a really complicated question because I hope that we've learned ever since. This really was a problem going back to the Eichel days. They finished first in the NHL in 2016, 2017. After that season, man, it has been, I feel like a talking point every year that it's just not good enough. And for so long they were trigger happy, like one-timer trigger happy. Now they don't. Now it just doesn't look good. Like you can't pinpoint one thing. On one night it's the entries, on another they just can't get anything going. And one shift here or there, they maybe will get better looks, but even then it feels like it's against units that are giving them time and space that other teams, like Pittsburgh, for example, was just feasting on. Like they were just so aggressive, and the Sabres just had no idea what to do. That it's a bad system in place. That's what it feels like, and it's very, very worrying that Seth Appert is struggling. That he struggled to put something together heading into the season. This was a big responsibility of Appert. He's the one new coach on the staff besides Lindy. And given how there was rumors at the start of the hiring process, he was going to be the next guy before they went to Lindy. He's probably the guy they want as the next head coach of the team. And it's not a good look that he hasn't been able to put any sort of cohesive power play system in place. And it's not pretty. And he's in no danger of being fired. That's sort of the issue here. Like they just have to come up with something different. What could that different be? Well, I sort of talked a little bit about it last episode. It feels like everybody was so dead set that this power play, they will not be just giving Tage Thompson one-timers for 2 minutes. Okay, great. I feel like they've almost gone so far in the other direction. Like, I haven't seen... Tage, he actually loaded up for a one-timer on the 6-on-5 against Columbus the other night, and it led to a goal. It feels like it's not that we don't want that. It's just that was the only play. Find more ways to get him open. And they just don't have those ways. And then even then, there's this is 2 seasons in a row where this is 2 seasons in a row now where preseason it looked really good. Like last year's preseason, Zach Benson was in that bumper on the first unit, and it looked really, really good. They got to the regular season, they took him off, and the power play looked terrible for the next 82 games. This season, same thing. They looked great in the preseason. I mean, it didn't look perfect, but it looked great in comparison to last year. You could see the guys moving. You could see what they were really sort of trying to establish. And as soon as we get to the regular season, just nothing. Literally nothing. Last game, it looked like very stagnant again. I don't know. It just feels... I wouldn't be surprised if the guys on the ice are feeling it. Like, it just keeps piling up, and there's just no confidence. There's no set plays. There's just no nothing, and it feels like there's no indication that anything's going to change. You know, I just think I also think there's already been a lot of personnel change. You know, Quinn and Tucker on the first power play unit, and now they're not. And Dylan Cousins is absolutely in no place to be on the first unit right now. There's no justification for it. And I like Jason Zucker. Net front on PP1, no. Put your best players out there and stick with it. Please, stick with it for like 10 games. And I would put your best players out there. Put Quinn back on the right wall. Or do the Dahlin and Power thing on the same unit and give them time. They had like 2 games to figure that out. And yeah, it didn't look good, but it's the same old story. Personnel, changing it, maybe fixes some little things. It's not going to solve the issues. There's just a bad system in place. You have to be more creative in today's NHL to have a good power play, especially since they're so important these days. It's very vital. If this team wants to make the playoffs, it has to get better, and just a lot better. So it's not a black and white answer. It's not something so direct, but I guess in summary, put your best players on the first unit and build some chemistry and, work in some plays. Just it's in summary, be better. It's really what it is. Just find the dangerous areas, be more confident with the puck, and try different stuff. Okay, moving on. This one is from a Dorky Nerd on Twitter. Would Devin Levi ideally be in Rochester? So I was sort of surprised that a lot of people were kind of saying this after the Columbus game. And look, I'll be the first person to say he wasn't good that game. Like, really not good. But also, I think it's a bit early for that conversation. I think Levi to Rochester, he hasn't been great this season, but it feels very akin to last year where he would have a few iffy games, and last year was very much apparent he needed to be down there. But this year, especially now, I mean, who are you going to call up? You're going to have Felix Sandstrom as your number 2 goalie? No, absolutely not. I mean, maybe if you want to go back in time and say Reimer should have been the second goaltender here, fine. I mean, he's doing pretty well. I think he only played the 1 game in Anaheim, but it was a really good effort by him. So maybe hindsight's 2020, but especially right now, no. And even then, I'd probably still say no, because I think he'll be fine. I think hopefully it was just one bad effort, and he gets back on track. The goaltending overall hasn't been stellar. Luukkonen had a strong bounce back game last game, and Levi was very good against the Panthers. And Levi was very good against the Devils that 1 game in Prague, but overall it's kind of it's been They haven't been winning games with it, but they haven't been losing games for the most part, so I think it's a bit early for that conversation. Talk to me in another month. This one is from @StJeremy55 on Twitter. Is Samuelsson in danger of being benched? I know that coaches and management like him, but he's had a really tough start to the season. My first thought is no. I think there is probably a little honeymoon period with him being awarded an A heading into this season. I don't think they'll go there yet. Quinn, there's a little bit more leeway just because he is young and doesn't have that same leadership responsibility. But hey, Samuelson's been on their third pair since the start of the season. Ruff has not been like Granato, where he's been trying to force him with Rasmus Dahlin, or even on the second pair with like Owen Power. He's already on the third pair, and he really hasn't wavered from that. So I think there could come a time in a few weeks where maybe the answer is yes. But also, like I said, the numbers on him, I mean, I haven't checked them post Chicago game, but I know some of his advanced numbers do have him coming out. They're probably a bit kinder to what than compared to what he's actually doing on the ice. So I know some people are touch and go with that stuff, but because what I can assume is that maybe some of the advanced stats guys on the staff are being like, maybe some of the mistakes are bad, but overall he's not really killing them in his minutes. So if those start to flip and it just becomes very apparent he's getting heavily outshot and outchanced when he's on the ice, I don't think there will be that much of a hesitation to bench him maybe. But then again, that having an A might give him more of a grace period. This next one is from Kevin on Instagram. Has Yuri Kulik earned his spot on the second line? I say yes. I think not in terms of like he's been good and he got his first goal. I'm not saying he's like this top 6 caliber winger all of a sudden. No, but I think if you're going to play him, try to get the most out of him. And I think if you want to get the most out of him, you put him with, conceivably your best playmakers. You're obviously not breaking the top line up right now. At the very least, I would keep Kulik with Cousins, or I guess whoever you would want to call your second line. So I guess maybe that means dropping him down with McLeod. But I think as much as I love McLeod, we can all acknowledge whether it's Benson or Greenway on that line, it's a bottom 6 line. That's what they're there to do. But I think Kulik, at the very least, get him on the top power play unit. Put him there. And I guess to go back to the power play conversation a little bit, he's like the one guy that looks like he knows what he's doing out there, or looks like a threat. And he's more than a Victor Olofsson. He can actually make passes out there and do more than just load up one-timers, and he can also load up one-timers. So I would just try it for now. Try and put Kulik on the top unit, and keep him in the lineup. There is really, if we go into the Dallas game and he's scratched, I think that's a mistake. I get it's tough to a degree that Greenway might be ready and you want to reunite that third line, which has been fantastic, and you don't want a healthy scratch Benson, but if you have to healthy scratch Quinn again, you just have to do it, man. You're at the stage of this. You're already at the stage of the season where you need to play your best lineup, and there is no leeway. That's what Lindy Ruff was brought in here to do. He was brought in to make guys accountable, and to go back to the Samuelsson conversation, I get it. If he doesn't want to scratch guys with A's this early, that's fine. If Jack Quinn is not if Quinn is not playing like a top 6 forward, then you just need to keep scratching him. It's extreme, but it's just kind of the place you're in, and there's really no reason Kulik should be scratched, at least right now. Maybe we're singing a different song by the end of the week, and he's looked sort of overwhelmed against Dallas and Detroit. So for now, I would say yes, though. I've liked what I've seen. This one is from Greg on Twitter. Is it fair to fire Adams if this season is a failure, if he had to build a roster that was coached by 3 head coaches and expect the group to respond to 3 different systems? And why haven't we hired a GM and head coach at the same time and left them to it for at least 5 years? Well, I'll start with the second one. Why haven't we hired a GM and head coach at the same time? It really doesn't happen that often. Well, I guess it sort of does. It depends on the situation. But what you should know is that a GM gets one hire. Like, he gets to bring in his guy, and if his guy ends up getting fired, usually the GM's not gone too long after. Think of Botterill and Housley. Housley was Botterill's guy. He got to hire Kruger after, but 1 year later he's gone. Same thing with Tim Murray and Dan Bylsma. Murray chose to stick by Bylsma, and that's why he was shown the door. He was his guy. Adams, yeah, he hired Granato, but that was a unique situation. Lindy Ruff is his guy. It's the guy he spent time. It's up for debate how much time he spent, but he went through the coaching interview process, and Ruff is the guy he chose to lead this team forward. And left them to do it for 5 years. Listen, this is the NHL. Coaching turnover, it's very common. Most guys don't stick it for, I would say, plus 3 seasons, at least if they're losing. Don Granato, for a large part of last season, was the 9th, 8th, and 7th longest tenured head coach. It's quick. This isn't like, I think in the NFL, it's more common to keep guys. Well, I shouldn't say that. Nah, NFL is pretty short too, unless you're like the Pittsburgh Steelers. 5 years is a long time. If you don't start to turn it over in like 2 years, you're close to being let go. But now to get to the first part. So this group being coached by 3 head coaches and expecting to respond to 3 different systems. I'm assuming he means that this group has been coached by Kruger in the past, Granato, and then now Ruff. I don't think that really plays into their struggles. I mean, a large portion of these guys, Granato's been like their introduction to the league, and I don't know. I don't think that really has. I don't think that's a big reason for why they look bad. I mean, if you think of the guys that have looked subpar this season, like Cousins or like Quinn or like Samuelson. I guess Cousins, yeah, he got 20 games of Kruger and then 3 years of Granato, and now he's with Ruff. But Jack Quinn getting into the NHL, it was Granato, and now he's with Ruff. And Samuelson, I guess it is hard to. It might be hard to remember. He did play. Actually, did he play games under Kruger? Well, he played games in that 2020 season. I do forget if it was with Kruger, but otherwise, yeah, it was just with Granato and then Ruff. I mean, it shouldn't be so overwhelming, especially when they both. If you're at least comparing Granato in 22-23 to Ruff now, they should be playing a similar system, more of a high octane, more offensive overall strategy. So I don't think that should really play into why this season might be failing a bit. Looking at that for being the reason to fire Adams, I mean, like I said, if this was a normal franchise, yeah, Adams would probably be shown. He would probably be on the hot seat right now. But there's a reason he's potentially about to get promoted. It's because it's pretty obvious behind the scenes this has not been a normal situation. I think that's a good segue to my next point, or my next question. This one's from Winsanity. All the gritty guys they signed this summer are actually pretty good. Maybe GM Kevin Adams actually did the best he could, and maybe there really is a hidden internal cap. I hate to recycle the same narrative over and over and over and over again, but when you get to the conversation about firing Adams, it's important to really lay out what you believe is going on here. Adams' additions, they do look good. Malenstein, he's just kind of doing his thing. Abe Kubel looked good in the preseason games he played, and then in the 10 minutes of regular season action before getting hurt. And same thing with Lafferty. I mean, like, they're normal fourth line guys, but then you get to like Ryan McLeod, and that just looks like a great addition. I mean, the defensive numbers aren't quite what they were in Edmonton right now, but I think over a larger sample size, those are going to get back to normal. And Jason Zucker, man, like, he's looked good as well, really under the radar, just because he hasn't been scoring yet. it's he made additions and they've looked good to this point. I just, they're still sitting on a lot of cap space. And like hypothetically, like let's say Adams is just being cheap for whatever reason that may be. He just doesn't want to spend. The fact that Terry Pegula is not like knocking down his door saying spend the money this summer, spend it, please spend it. Either way, it's worrying because you either have an owner that's telling him not to spend or you have an owner that's not telling him to spend. Either way, it's just a very, it's unacceptable. And if you're like me, I believe there is some sort of financial restraints because why do they still have so much cap space? And why haven't extensions been signed, at least for somebody like JJ Peterka? I mean, I guess I get that why people might be hesitant about Jack Quinn right now, but, why? These conversations, they haven't even been rumored to have been happening. And something like the Peyton Krebs situation, which took forever to hammer out. I don't know. It's another thing that we talked a lot about. We talked quite a decent bit about Adams last episode, so I would probably I would encourage you to go give that more of a listen. I just don't think there's any reason to really entertain it right now, especially when he's rumored to get a promotion pretty soon. This next one is from Josh Allen on Sundays, keeps the Sabres away. If we miss the playoffs but finish above 500 according to the Deservometer, should we consider the season a success? For example, according to the Deserve to Win-O-Meter, we should be 3-4 instead of 2-4-1. Listen, any season that doesn't end with playoffs is a failure. But I get what you're getting at because they have been the better team in quite a few of these games, or at least in a few of them. Like, yes, they should have another win at the very least. And look, I don't want to live through another season where they don't make the playoffs. If they have a losing record, I'm not really going to care what the Deserve to Win-O-Meter says. I love the Deserve to Win-O-Meter. It's copium on a lot of nights, especially if your team comes out ahead in a game, like the LA Kings game where the Sabres absolutely should have won. It makes you feel better when you're trying to fall asleep at night, but over the large sample size, over an 82-game season, if you have a losing record, you have a losing record. Deserve to Win-O-Meter season might have been palatable like 5 or 6 years ago. Definitely not now. Just win. I don't care if every single game for the rest of the season is like the Blackhawks one. If they get into the playoffs, it's a success. I prefer they look more dominant than they did, but get into the playoffs. Please. Please just get in. I don't want to be seeing videos like today reminiscing about that time there was a protest outside the arena, and that was 5 years ago. I don't want to do that anymore. So just get in. It is absolutely a failure if they have a losing record. Next one is from Just Hudson on Twitter. Is there a way for Sabres Twitter to become less whiny and obnoxious and instead look for the positives in the team and become a positive force like Bills Mafia was during their drought? I think we have very different recollections of Bills Mafia during the drought. Is not what it is today. Back then, it was just drunk college kids jumping through folding tables, and inevitably became a sensation. And now the entire fan base is called Bills Mafia. But back then, when it was a lot smaller, it was quite the opposite. And people were so negative back then. Obviously, there's more apathy for the Sabres now. Obviously, this is, back then social media wasn't a thing, or definitely not as big as it is now. And missing 17 years straight in the NFL is more, it's more likely than compared to what the Sabres are doing now. So that's part of the reason why the apathy is sort of built in. There's not going to be a positive force in the Sabres fan base. It's not going to happen because, The Sabres don't have the excuse of playing the greatest quarterback of all time 2 times a season. And, even the Bills, perpetually mediocre. Mediocre is a lot better than anything the Sabres have had for a large portion of this drought. And look, we have been on record complaining about toxicity in the Sabres fan base because sometimes it's way too much. Like when they were celebrating Jeff Skinner's 1,000th game last year, and everybody was just taking cheap shots, and it's at a point it just becomes it becomes exhausting. I get it. You see it every game. You do. But that's what happens when you were in a 13-year playoff drought. Standards are high. And especially this season where, look, you're not fooling anybody anymore. We're 13 years in. The only people still watching are the diehards. And the diehards have been through this whole shindig 13 times. Or at least, I guess, since Eichel made the team, probably 7 or 8. We know the feeling of going through a bad start and never being able to get out of it, or seeing things that while they might be early in the season, we just know that they're going to be a trend, and the Sabres themselves really can't sell anything to us anymore. You can't sell hope anymore because we're past the hope point. We're just at the results point. And if the results are bad, then people don't care and they're going to be negative. So, I get it. You want to see the positive. I am trying so hard to find the positives in this team early on. Like, I'm really trying. But there will be a breaking point for me if things don't turn around. There will be. It's just inevitable. And I also think, I get it. Bills Mafia is a great fan base. Different portions of it. The portion of the fan base that donates to charity that does look for the positives in a lot of things, but there's a lot of negatives. I tend to think all sports fan bases are basically the same. That there's really not one that's better or worse. They all have the same amount of good people and the same amount of bad people and negative people and whatnot. But I think the Sabres, it's a bit of a peculiar situation, so there is probably a lot more negative out there compared to most teams. But it's a good question, and it raises an interesting discussion. This next one is from Rosie on Twitter. You guys said you would want my hot take league-wide a while ago. My biggest one is that Detroit finishes last in the Atlantic. So our first non-Sabres question topic here. I like this one because for anybody that listened to our Sabres versus the Atlantic series knows that I felt the same sentiment, that I felt that Detroit would finish last in the Atlantic. Now, that was before Patrick Laine was out for the Canadiens, but he'll still be back for them at some point this season. I know they're, what are they, 2-2 now, I think? They just look like last year's team, and if their shooting percentage regresses, and if their goaltending's off to another hot start, like Alex Lyon again is playing very well, and so is Cam Talbot. If those regress, then I don't see any reason why they're the worst team in the Atlantic. I guess maybe Montreal. It's sort of the same thing with them because they're also off to their yearly good start where their key guys are scoring, they're getting good goaltending, but then over the course of a full season they tend to dip back. I could see that being kind of a hot potato between them. I can totally see Detroit finishing last. So I think that is gonna do it for the mailbag. Well, as always, thank you for sending in questions and asking and raising interesting topics. Like I said, a large portion of these kind of all go together. A lot of Cousins questions, a lot of power play stuff, and then a few interesting ones thrown in there. So even if I didn't read off your question, I definitely read it. But I think there are more pressing issues to talk about and address. So stay tuned for the next one. I think we'll make this a monthly thing. I don't know. And for today, it felt very appropriate to where they were at. So thank you for sending those in. Before we wrap up, though, there are 2 segments that I want to get to really quickly. I got to keep the tradition going of This Team Stinks for our Sunday episodes. And while Christian's not here, I will carry it on. And there's really only one team to talk about. The offseason champions, that being the Nashville Predators. They're 0-5. 0-5. That is just... Nobody showed Terry Pegula that they're 0-5 because that's going to encourage him to spend even less, considering the amount of money they threw around this offseason. But in reality, that's crazy. I mean, even it feels like they deserve a lot better. Even just looking at their stats, Forsberg's point per game. O'Reilly has 4 points in 5 games. Marchessault has 4 points in 5 games, so he's not off to really a bad start. I guess Stamkos only has the 1 goal, but I don't know. It's just a weirdly bad start. UC Saros just has not been himself. An .875 save percentage right now. It's not looking great in Smashville right now, but I still think they'll end up getting into the playoffs. But definitely the most surprising start to the season for any team in the league. And then finally, I think we're going to call this segment, I think, just checking in with old friends. Maybe it's boring. I couldn't find another one that really fit. That being checking in on some old Sabres friends. And today there's 2 in particular. So Casey Mittelstadt, 4 goals and an assist in 5 games played. He is playing right now. The Avalanche are playing the Sharks. I guess I haven't taken a look at their box score yet. But heading into tonight, he's off to probably the best start of his career, at least in terms of goal scoring. And, given how Colorado has been struggling out of the gate because their depth is really underratedly bad, he's getting a lot of opportunity, which includes being on their first power play unit. So, hey, good for Casey. He's taken full advantage of it. Doesn't make discourse in the Sabres community any more fun, but I will be rooting for him, and it's cool to see him to continue to traject upward. And then Tyler Myers, his 1,000th game in the NHL the other night, which so weirdly coincided with the Sabres' 1,000th game since last playing in a playoff game. So depressing and insane that those were on the same night, that the one guy who is he's the only active player from the last team to make the playoffs in Buffalo, that they each shared their 1,000th games on the same nights. Cool for Tyler Myers. It's still kind of insane. He's had 1,000 games. I don't know. He's just someone who just feels perpetually old to me, or perpetually young to me. But he had a pretty insane assist to Brock Besser in this game, through the legs, no look. That's one way to celebrate game 1,000. So very cool milestone for him, and very cool to see him have a big moment in that game with the Vancouver Canucks. So didn't want to get too in-depth this episode. I feel like I've done enough talking. We'll definitely be back next Sunday, hopefully with more in-depth This Team Stinks and checking in with old friends. But yeah, I think that is going to do it for this one. I believe I touched on everything Sabres related. I don't think there was really anything more I wanted to talk about. Got to all the questions I thought were appropriate. And yeah. So, thank you guys very much for listening and or watching. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow us at the Sabre Report. Also on Instagram and TikTok at the Sabre Report. If you watch this on YouTube, thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you want updates for the pod, you can go on Twitter and follow us at Sabre Report Pod. As always, go give our friends over at the Buffalo Sports Talk podcast a listen. A big win today against the Titans. Big win today against the Tennessee Titans. So I'm sure they will have their recap and analysis out sometime later this week. And if you're still jazzed up from the Amari Cooper edition, they did release an episode on him this past Tuesday, which was a really great listen. So be sure to go give them a chance. But I think other than that, like I said, we should be back to normal Thursday. Christian should be back, and then JP should be rejoining the two of us next Sunday. So Sabres are back at home on Tuesday versus the Dallas Stars. That's a pretty big matchup. And then Saturday, they play the Detroit Red Wings. So those are the two games that we will talk about this week. So I won't keep you guys any longer. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. And as always, go Sabres.